Welcome back. This is Zephyr with a continuation of the Salt and Sanctuary patch notes from patch 10 through 12. So last time we covered a lot of enemy stuff and consumables. This time we're going to be talking more on the items and equipment and things like that, and hopefully we'll cover just about everything here. So, many things were good, but fell off, especially in things like New Game Plus or just in general. And so a lot of these items have been buffed or tweaked or changed in some fashion. So first up, Charms and Rings. The HP leech on charms as well as the leech on weapons is now a 2% of your max health. This has a factor for hit types as well. So if you're hitting with a bigger weapon like a greatsword, it is 3%. And if you're hitting with pretty much everything else, it is 2%. And if you're hitting with kind of a multi-hit, such as the spinning dagger or the spinning halberd type attacks, those are reduced down to 1%. MP Leech or Focus Leech on charms and weapons is unchanged, as focus does not scale in the same way as health. It has been left alone. But it does continue to use a value factor for hits, which means that when you're using a great weapon, you'll get 1.0 instead of 0.5. But daggers are still going to be your better bet compared to a sword, as daggers hit quicker on both of these. Silver Salt Charm now uses its full cost only for great weapons and has been halved for all other weapons. So a value factor again. This time the value factor is just reducing it for other weapons. Silver Salt Charm just costs too much, but it is also a 25% bonus. So it costs a percentage of your current next level up, which means that as long as you have salt, you're going to do extra damage. If you have 0 salt, it does not try to take salt away. It does not try to give you extra damage. As long as you have even 1 salt, I believe it gives you the damage. But it will reduce you to 0 for the next attack, of course. Stone Charm. This is true also of the extra poise effect. The Stone Charm has been changed from 10% plus 5 to just plus 10. Most effects were just plus 10 anyway, or plus 10%. So Stone Charm is now actually better on smaller weapons, and it is still very good on great weapons as well. So for an example of this, the poise damage of a sword is 18. And if you put plus 10 on it, it becomes 28. And 28 happens to be the poise of a greatsword. A great axe, I believe, is 32, or excuse me, 32, and a great hammer is 34. Now, heavy attacks have a value factor or a motion value to them for poise and damage for most attacks. So a heavy attack with a two-handed great hammer is going to be a lot more than just simply 34 poise. But you're getting plus 10 after the percentage bonuses and factors for other things. This is, in effect, a way to normalize the value as well as to standardize it in a way that kind of steps through the different weapon types. So a dagger is 8, a sword is 18, and a greatsword is 28. So putting on the Stone Charm takes it to the next level of sizing, if you will. For most weapons that are not great weapons using a heavy attack, this is a bonus. For great weapons using a heavy attack, this is a mild nerf, as you were probably only getting 10 bonus poise anyways. So for example, the 34 poise of a great hammer would be amplified by 50% on a heavy attack. 50% of 34 would be 17. You're going to do approximately 50 poise. So 10 poise is basically the same thing. Not quite. It's a little more complex than that. There's other multipliers in there too. So it is a small nerf. It is not exactly the same thing. Mending Band from 0.25 health per second to 1% max health per second. This fell off almost immediately in the game as you start with approximately 80 health depending on your class. You quickly approach 100 health and then past that as well. By around level 15, you have about 125, 130 health, and Mending Band becomes borderline useless right around there. A red shard gives 2% of your max health over 10 seconds. Excuse me, 2% per second over 10 seconds. So this is like wearing a half effect red shard at all times. It does not, however, prevent any form of wounding or heal wounding in any way. So you will still need to use something like Sacred Linens or the bandaged ring to reduce your wounding to make this effective. And if you could last for the 50 seconds or so that the Mending Band takes to heal you from half health to full health, then you probably deserve that bonus health for using the ring slot. This now also scales generally into New Game Plus. And a note on the actual values here is that 0.25 health per second, when you have 100 health, about level 3, level 5, somewhere in there, is less than 1% max health. So in effect, I've basically quadrupled this. So 1% max health at 100 health is 1 health per second. So it's effectively 4 times the strength as it used to be, but it almost never was worn by players. It was pretty bad. And while this game is a Dark Souls-like, it is still meant to have alternative ways of playing, and that is a big focus on Enhanced, is to buff what was not being used or what was being completely ignored, and kind of bring things into normal play. Whip attacks. There is a special new whip attack effect. I have reworked whip attacks in general so that if you're using it two-handed or one-handed, technically the animation is very, very similar and there's no real bonuses there. So you're not really getting anything out of that other than if it's like a whip sword or something that has strength bonus or whatnot. So whip attacks now have a critical effect at the tip. There is a square basically around the tip of the whip when you use it, and this hitbox deals 50% bonus damage and it deals 30 stagger. So it is just a little bit less than a great hammer. Great sword being 28 stagger. The whip heavy attack now also deals 50% bonus damage at all times and deals 20 stagger. However, the heavy attack now has double the stamina cost, and the reasoning behind the double stamina cost is kind of 2 pieces. One, it's easy. It's an easy metric that I can do. I did it inside the animation, so by having just a second piece of the animation do something there, it just doubles the value. 2, whip attacks aren't very heavy stamina usage. And 3, whip class, as well as dagger class and some other stuff over in that region of the skill tree, give willpower. So you're going to, if you focus into whips, have a lot of willpower. And the heavy attack, it is, in this case, in Enhanced, it is meant to be more of a get out of my face situation. And interestingly enough, when I built the whip crack critical, I had not yet considered the use of offhand weapons. But when I was testing it, I immediately considered the use of offhand weapons. Offhand weapons, and they all have a little bit different version of this, have a bounce back or backflip to them, a back step of effect, which allows you to position yourself right into the whip crack again. So if an enemy is in melee range and you fail the whip crack, you can then use your offhand weapon, reposition, and attack again. And unless the enemy is really fast or really in your face, that should put you right back into the distance to allow you to get that bonus damage. This is intended to be a buff overall for whips, and the heavy attack is more in-your-face combat. There are a lot of bosses that the heavy attack is very valuable against because you simply cannot keep your distance against them to get that critical effect. A note on the critical effect is that it takes secondary precedence. So if something's in your face, the whip itself hits first, which cancels out the critical effect. You have to be hitting them only at the tip. So it's only effective at the distance. Overall whip damage has been also increased by, it says 10% here, but it's about 8% on some and 10% on others. The martial flail now is a blunt weapon, extra blunt weapon. So it means it's 50% strike damage instead of pure slash, as all whips are pure slash by default. The scorpion tail, which is a poison weapon, is now all slash instead of extra blunt. There were a lot of elemental weapons that were extra blunt in the past, which made them very kind of bad because they'd split the physical damage between slash and blunt, and then the remaining damage would be elemental. So a lot of those have been removed. The scorpion tail is now fast hitter to help you actually proc the poison from the whip. And the whip crack and the heavy attack motion values, they will give you more poison damage. They amplify the entire damage of the weapon. Bone Whip now has HP on hit instead of MP on hit, and the Phoenix Tail is no longer extra blunt as well. The Phoenix Tail also has some other changes to make it so that it is not as tedious to spec into, such as it no longer needs the class 1 magic user. It has triple stats already, but triple stats are also benefited by the stat changes from episode 2. Those are discussed more in depth. Ammo didn't really serve much of a purpose, and a lot of people didn't even know how it worked. And when I dug into this back in the days of Desalinated, I discovered that ammo was basically useless after probably level 20, level 25 maybe. So all ammo in the old days, classic mode, gives either +2 or +3 damage. If it's a crossbow, it gives +2. If it's a bow or a pistol, it gives +3. Now, if it was an elemental piece of ammo, such as the poison ammo or the shock ammo or the fire arrow, it would give that bonus damage of +2 or +3 as the element, 100% as that element. But that bonus damage was calculated after all other bonuses. So in the early game, when your bow is doing 10 or 12 damage, a fire arrow doing +3 fire damage, it's okay. It's not terrible, and +3 damage at that point in the game is pretty big. But when you get to the later parts of the game, especially since I've now buffed all bows and crossbows and stuff, I'll mention that down below. It starts down here. This means that when they're at max rank, the soft cap, rank 7, all that stuff, they only get +3 fire damage from that fire arrow. So you're doing 8% bonus damage, 7% bonus damage as fire, and that's worse than a charm. And bows can't use charms, and crossbows can't use charms, and pistols can't use charms. So ammo is intended, in my design here of enhanced, to be kind of charm-like. I remember a Saturday morning where I was passing this off to James, and I recall him saying, "That's an interesting idea," and then just kind of accepting that it could be cool. Overall, he liked it, so he said, "Sure, go ahead." So ammo now converts 50% of the weapon's damage to its type if the ammo itself is elemental. Naturally, you need ammo for all weapons of this type, but if you use a fire arrow, your bow now becomes 50% fire. So it's not quite acting like a charm, where charms would give a 10% bonus of that damage type. Instead, it is converting the entire weapon into, well, 50% of that entire weapon into that damage type. So it works like extra blunt or extra blades in the exact same math. So now it's kind of like extra fire or extra shock, where if you have a weapon that were to deal poison damage, it's already 50%, and you use poison ammo with it, this takes it to 75% poison. Just for ammo weapons. All weapons have been adjusted to make up for the ammo damage difference. This has been wrapped up into the weapon itself, and the UI has been updated for Enhanced and Classic separately to make sure that this +2 or +3 damage is always shown or removed in the context of which game version you're using. So a weapon that was a pistol might have done something like 100 base damage, +3 ammo damage, and then a hidden modifier of 1.5 times damage. So it was doing 153 damage. That will now actually appear in the UI, although pistols have been nerfed. Ammo costs have also been restandardized so that they are cheaper. So all of the regular ammo is now 10, except for flint shot, which is now 30. And all the special ammo is now 30, except for flint shot specials are now 60. They used to be something like 100. So much cheaper, much more fair. They're still very powerful, both because of the range that they grant you and the damage that they can deal now is actually somewhat useful on bows and crossbows specifically. Throwing daggers damage has been increased. So the average throwing dagger dealt up to 14 damage. Up to. This was kind of pitiful. It really wasn't meant to be a combat solution like the throwing potions or the firebombs. So the firebombs do 30 and they don't scale with any stat. The throwing daggers scaled with dexterity and only did 4 damage, something like that. So they would scale up to 14. But then you get into the elemental daggers and they would do 14 damage as well as 14 of the element. Still not amazing, but better than the regular throwing dagger. So you're getting the throwing dagger and the element. So this has been standardized from 14 to 20, and the regular throwing dagger now scales up to 40, which is just like 3 or 4 damage less than a regular dagger in your hand, except for you're consuming it every time you throw it. So throwing daggers now actually deal damage. The Roots Creed Poison Dagger has been changed from multiplicative scaling to linear. So it kind of had this square value in there where it did no damage and then suddenly did 98 poison damage. The regular physical damage didn't change, but the poison damage was this kind of 8 times multiplier, 9 times multiplier that happened over the course of 50 dexterity. So that has been changed. It's linear, just like every other weapon. In Enhanced, it does 20 base damage like every other dagger, and now only deals 80 poison damage. Now, a note on this poison damage. Poison resistance has been nerfed and buffed on various enemies, and poison proccing has been buffed across the board based on poison resistance. So it will still take a minimum of 4 or so hits from any weapon to proc poison, but you will proc it slightly faster on anything with actual resistances. So, for example, the Kraken Worm previously, I believe, took something like 22 hits to proc poison, and now it takes something like 16. So you will definitely still be able to kill most bosses. You will have to probably turn in 1 more time to be able to kill every boss, so you might need 3 stacks of 25 of these daggers to kill every boss in New Game. And you might need more stacks than that in New Game Plus. But overall, it is fair. I have tested a bunch of bosses with the nerf on this, and I think it's pretty fair. It does mean that you have to turn in, but the Stone Roots actually happen to be the easiest creed to turn in for. As well, in both Classic and Enhanced, they now sell the Dexterity Ring. That was added in patch 9 before Classic and Enhanced were created. Potato damage. I wanted to embrace my past with the potato run that Lemon or the Backlogs has done, and potato damage has been increased. It is not quite as good as an actual throwing dagger, but it has significantly more poise damage at 8 instead of 3, which is what the poise is for regular throwing dagger, and it does 25 damage at 50 dexterity instead of 14. And potatoes are now purchasable, as well as daggers are now purchasable at the merchant, so you can run either one of them. Potatoes are cheaper than daggers, but they do less damage. And they do blunt damage. They always have. Bows. All bow damage has been increased significantly. Bows now deal 100% slash instead of something like 90% slash and 10% strike, which was kind of weird and not usually very important, and mostly just nerfed your damage. So when I say significantly more damage, the average bow has gone from 40 or so, 38 damage, 40 damage at max rank, to about 100 or 90 damage at max rank. This doesn't exist. Vilehawk bow now has the extra poise flag, which means that it is really annoying, just like the enemies that use it, because they will stagger you and you fall to your death. So I figured, why not give the player the same joy? Bloodwood bow now has the HP leech special. It is Bloodwood, so it is magically somehow also HP leeching. The Aegis Great Bow is now slow hitter, which in patch 12 was buffed from 10% to 15% when it's on bows. So I say buffed. This means that it does more damage. And the 15% just is because the bow does not use a lot of frames. So the 10% was not very noticeable. So this increases the amount of frame delay on releasing the arrow, but not holding the arrow in the notch. So you can still hold the arrow mid-air. It doesn't reduce or grant anything beneficial to holding it mid-air or holding it in general. The recurve bow is now fast hitter, and also in patch 12, this was also changed to 15% when on bows. So this would show hopefully a little bit more of the effect that is being added here. Crossbows. Crossbows deal significantly more damage. Similar to bows, they've been buffed by about 80 to 90% of their original damage. Crossbows now deal 75% slash instead of 80% slash or something like that. I figured crossbows make more sense to pierce armor, and that's kind of the idea of blunt, is that it's sort of piercing normal armor, and then you need other forms of armor underneath it to deal with that strike damage. The Adrastea is now arcane damage instead of fire damage. It was a repeat. There were 2 fire crossbows, and the Adrastea has a lot of lore in it about souls and darkness and stuff, and I think it was probably just a misclick at some point that turned it fire damage, and then just stayed there for forever. Just a theory. Bloodwood bow, crossbow, has the HP leech special, just like the Bloodwood regular bow has the HP leech special. The Predator crossbow is now extra blades and also piercing. It can hit a max of 3 enemies per bolt, and it cannot hit bosses or fat enemies more than once per bolt. So, which was a problem when it was being tested out a little bit there. So Predator crossbow is really fun. I've used it a little bit here and there for playtesting, and I find it really exciting. I debated on giving the piercing effect to all crossbows, but I felt that was too much, so I just isolated it to a single crossbow. It's really fun to just watch those pierce through regular enemies mostly, or minions in certain boss fights, and just go to town. But it doesn't really increase your damage overall outside of those situations. It's just a fun little extra bonus. Pistols. The UI now shows the full damage because they had a hidden 1.5x multiplier, and pistol damage has been decreased by approximately 10%. It's probably closer to 7%. This includes the Gunblade Blast. It's still good, and ammo itself has been reduced from 50 to 30, and special ammo has been reduced from 100 to 60. So quite a big buff to the cost of ammo. This will probably be mentioned somewhere down below, but pistols are now purchasable from any creed at rank 2, whereas in Devara, for whatever reason, always sold them at rank 1, and that has been maintained. Fists. Fists have been changed quite a bit. In the original game, they did not have motion values, and the UI didn't show their damage, and they could get extraordinarily high damage, but because their movement set is kind of limited, that damage was not very meaningful in any fashion. So in Enhanced, I tried to do what I could without editing animations themselves, as I am not an animator. The whip critical was tedious enough to tweak that I was not going to mess with the fist animations. So fists have been buffed a little bit at the beginning of the game in enhanced, so that you can actually kind of kill stuff. They did 4 damage, which was equivalent to like a potato, the old potato even. So they do max of 40 damage in the base game. They scale directly with strength in the base game. So you start with 5 strength and deal 4 damage. You end with 50 strength at soft cap and deal 40 damage. In enhanced, you start a little higher, but you still end at the same location. So the scaling and all the numbers behind the scenes are changed. The twin metal ring now grants more damage in the beginning of the game. So it's not quite 100% damage. It's kind of close to it. But at the base value here, it goes from 6.7 to 10.4. And from 40 damage to 50.1. The 0.1 is not very meaningful. I just wanted to make sure that it actually rounded up to 50. So it is stronger as a percentage in the early game. So it's giving like 3.7 damage in the early game, which is pretty good. But it scales up with, it changes the strength scaling now. So it's like kind of like equipping a different weapon entirely. So consider the twin metal ring to be kind of like a weapon, like brass knuckles or something in the context of the damage change here. It's stronger in the early game. It's weaker in the late game. So in the late game, in Classic, it does give 20 damage. Here it only gives 10. But it is found in the early game. It is meant as more of a early game ring slot sacrifice or change. So the original game did not have motion values on fists. They were kind of bad, but they scaled up to crazy damage to the extent that they were close to a great weapon. So that's been kind of reined in by the nerf to twin metal ring. It's only 10 damage nerf, but it does add up because of other bonuses. So there is the gloves. There's 2 different gloves that give 50% bonus damage. That means the 20 damage nerfed to 10 damage here is also nerfed from something like 30 damage to 15 damage elsewhere because of bonuses. You add in things like the Blood Flower Ring or the Blood Flower Charm. Also note, elemental charms do work on fists, but elemental buffs do not. And that's just how the base game was. And I wasn't going to change the buffs because it's kind of weird. You don't really light your hands on fire. And there's no art or animation for it. So motion values, though, because of the nerfs to the base damage, I wanted to add motion values as well. So uppercut, it's your strong attack. Most strong attacks give a 50% bonus damage or 1.5 multiplier. So uppercut is the is bonus damage. So strong attack deals more damage, 100% more damage. It's very slow, but it's this big old right hook type attack. And uppercut deals 50% more damage. You can't really follow up the uppercut with much. It just kind of flings enemies. Kickflip move has been added. The kickflip move overrides the uppercut if you're pressing down. So this is the dagger kickflip. It deals only a 25% multiplier. It does not turn your fists blunt because they already are blunt. So it's not as valuable in the sense of the dagger, which turns it blunt, turns the dagger blunt. Only it works if you are pressing the down key or toggle. And then there's now a riposte move that has been added just for the sake of having a riposte move. It is a reused animation. Maces. The Lup hammer, which is the blacksmith's hammer, you can see it in his hand, was never actually added to the game. So I added it to the game. And it is now a tier 1 mace and has been buffed accordingly. It is purchasable for 500 gold and at all ranks. And it has, I believe, extra poise. So it is actually pretty strong in the early game if you just need a mace. But I believe it might be slower than some other maces. I'd have to check on that. Harmon's mace and Flange mace have now gained physical scaling from wisdom. So Harmon's mace, Harmon was a cleric that went and did a bunch of stuff. So his mace makes sense to be wisdom scaling in some fashion. And then the flange mace is the class or tier 0 mace that the cleric actually starts with. And otherwise, if you're the paladin, you actually start with the tier 1 Morning Star instead. So these both have a wisdom scaling. The wisdom scaling is about 1/3 of the weapon's total stat scaling. So it is strength wisdom. And they are not holy, they're just physical. Salt and Sacrifice has a physical wisdom scaling mace, as well as one of the major mods by Pax Empyrean had a wisdom scaling mace, if I recall. So that was a thing that was discussed a long time ago back in Desalinated era when I was first modding. So I wanted to add that in there to give something to the cleric early game to be able to focus more into wisdom and not just have no weapon value there. It is still only 1/3 of the total stat scaling on the weapon, but it is still quite valuable. The Iron Pot has been buffed with a new special, the match all buffs. So it doesn't matter if you're doing fire, lightning, holy, poison, arcane, or golden wine on the Iron Pot and enhanced, it always gets the 20% bonus multiplier. So instead of 35%, it's 42% multiplier. And if it's something like Divine Bless weapon, which is scaled off of your wisdom, then it'll give the 20% bonus to the final value after scaling, which is how the matching works. It's just that 20% is a different value than the original game. So the Iron Pot had really high scaling in the base game. Match all buffs was placed on 2 or 3 weapons to offset the changes to buffs in general. Also, the Iron Pot just makes sense to be on fire. Go light it on fire. Daggers. The Dagger Riposte now deals 4 times damage instead of 2 times damage. This was a request by a couple people to kind of line up the game a little bit more with Dark Souls, but also because daggers are fun, and I did not buff daggers directly. So same thing here. The light attack in the combo. So if you always end with 2 hits of the light attack, you will do a 20% bonus multiplier on the dagger attack, which means that it's a 10% bonus damage in total as long as you're only using light attacks. But there's the kick flip, there's the heavy attack, which the heavy attack has a huge motion value of like 4.5, and it's just really slow. But it's got a huge multiplier there of something like 4.5. That's scaled on dexterity, so it's not 4.5 by default. It's 4.5 at soft cap. But I didn't add those, so I didn't want to buff daggers directly. These are some ways that I could buff daggers to make them a high skill or fun skill oriented weapon. So you've got a lot of different moves there with some different multipliers instead of just simply bonus damage on every attack. Other things, the poise weapon flag also grants 10 staggers. So I talked about this earlier. So daggers have 8 poise, swords have 18, great swords have 28, hammers have 24, great hammers have 34, and so it steps through each weapon class. Just like the daggers were buffed in Riposte, all weapons have been buffed in Riposte. Riposte originally, the critical backstab effect, so to say, after a parry, dealt double physical damage in the base game, but now they deal all your damage double. So if you're using a fire sword or something like that, and you riposte something, you'll actually do the fire damage previously. You did double physical damage, but you didn't have any physical damage because it's a fire sword, so you lost out on the bonus damage. So now it just deals double damage, a flat double damage instead of something more complex or weird. And slow hitter weapons all across the board now grant more damage as an offset to the speed loss. Slow hitter weapons have been a common complaint in both Salt Sanctuary and Salt and Sacrifice, where they just don't stand up to the loss in speed because you can't roll, you can't block, you can't parry, you can't get a second hit. They're just a little too slow. And they're only 10% in Salt and Sanctuary. It's just 10% slower for originally a something like 16% damage boost. Now it is closer to a 20% damage boost, depending on the class tier of the weapon. A minimum of 20% damage boost for slow hitting weapons. So armor. Heavy armor across the board now has 6.5% less weight. Doesn't sound like much, but it adds up. It does. It really does. As well, there's a bunch of bonus effects on gear. Nameless God's chest piece now grants the torch buff. It has candelabras on the back. It should light up the room. It doesn't grant the torch buff for actual interaction within the world. It just makes the world bright so that you can see. There's kind of two pieces to this. One, he's the Nameless God. Two, you cannot one-hand his sword. So if you want to cosplay as the Nameless God, you can two-hand his sword and never have to worry about light outside of actually interacting with some of the brand effects. Golem's torso now has the mending band effect, so that you always heal when you're wearing that. You're a golem. You're just kind of everlasting there. The Cavalier's chest has the wounding effect reduction. So you can go into more heavy armors and have some of these effects, as a lot of the heavy armors did not have any effects. The Demon Cote gloves have +3 dexterity. The Demon set is already really strong, but this creates kind of a mid-tier light armor set that has dexterity, as well as the Assassin's Gauntlets have dexterity, because the Blacksmith's gloves outshined a lot of different builds. I wanted to create build diversity, so I added dexterity to these gloves. And the Titan's glove are the heavy version of the Blacksmith's gloves. So there is a light version and a heavy version for both strength and dexterity gloves. The Demon armor set now grants equal strike defense as it does slash. I can't remember if this is a buff or a nerf, but it's kind of a normalization somewhere in there. The Resplendent armor set is now symmetrical defense for everything but poison, kind of like Golden Wine. And the poise on the Resplendent armor set has been reduced because it is made of gold. So it does not grant as much poise, but it is one of the higher values of defense. Kind of a cosplay design with the Golden Wine. The Palatine Coif has been moved up a tier. The Palatine Coif is one of the weirdest helmets in the game. In the code, anything without poise is considered light armor. That's all it's checking. Does it have 0 poise? So the Palatine Coif belongs to the Palatine set. And the Palatine set is all heavy armor, but the helmet isn't. It was a class 0 heavy armor, so it didn't matter. But the Knight starts with the Palatine set and has armor 1. So it's been moved up. I've adjusted the values a little bit. For whatever reason, this helmet has the craziest, highest ratios to weight of defense than any other piece of equipment in the game, if I recall. And it was a class 0. And primarily it was just like arcane defense. It was just like 40 arcane defense, which just was crazy high, just super high. So some of that's been kind of moved around a little bit, but it's still one of the best helmets in the game by weight. Obviously, you can get more defenses from heavier armor later in the game. The chain armor set, which is found in 3 or 4 pieces across the world, I wanted a reason for you to actually go and hunt that out and pick it up. It now has a bonus poise value. It also did not get the heavy armor less weight bonus that every other piece of armor did. So it's kind of extra heavy for an earlier game set, but it's also strewn about, so you have to go hunt it down. But it has something like 50% bonus poise based on its original weight. So it's like tier 4 heavy armor poise in a tier 1 or so heavy armor set. And then the Raider's armor now has extra strike defense. For whatever reason, I just did that. Moving on from armors. Great hammers. Greyhammer's been nerfed by 15%. This is primarily a late game nerf, although different weapons had different adjustments. You will notice this, but you will also not notice this, because you're going to pick up the Obsidian Pillar or something else, and you're going to one-shot everything like you used to. Unless you didn't one-shot it like you used to, and now you have to two-shot it. So basically, a 15% nerf to the long-term damage of a weapon means kind of in the mid or the late game, you're going to be taking a given great weapon, and for every 7 or so hits that you previously did, you will now have to do an 8th hit. So it is a nerf. It will make you have to stay in the fight just a little bit longer. So for every boss that previously took maybe only 4 hits, it will now take 5 or 6. For every boss that took 9 hits, it might take 10. But overall, most enemies, you'll still be 2-hitting them or 1-hitting them for Great Hammers. It's not that big of a nerf, even though it sounds like a huge nerf. It mostly affects bosses because you are one-shotting enemies by overkill values anyways. So 15% less damage on an overkill is still overkill. The Obsidian Pillar has been buffed and nerfed in different ways. It no longer has extra poise. But how things work is if a weapon has a special, it has less damage. So technically the Obsidian Pillar has more damage comparative to what it probably would have had it kept the extra poise. It also has match all buffs like the Iron Pot, which means that if you put something like Divine Blessed Weapon on it or Golden Wine, those don't stack in Enhanced, but you can pick one or the other. It now has match all buffs, so it will gain bonus damage compared to other weapons. So it will match as if it's a holy weapon with Divine Blessed Weapon. It'll match as if it's a physical weapon with, well, Golden Wine naturally matches with physical weapons. But you get the idea. Great Swords have also been nerfed, but this is more 10%. Some are more 11%, some are more 8%, but this is kind of an average. So the Claymore has extra reach now. It looks really long, so I gave it extra reach. It actually hits pretty much right at the tip. And with the Pale Charm, the Reach Charm, you can actually hit things across gaps with this sword now, which is funny, fun, interesting, and it's a classic sword, so I wanted it to have some kind of special to it. An extra reach isn't extra damage, but it is a silly amount of extra reach, especially when you pair it with the Pale Charm. I like utility effects. Instead of just being raw damage, you have this horizontal choice instead of a vertical power creep. Great Swords and Great Scissors can now transmute back and forth. Common complaint, a common lockout. You transmute into a scissor. You don't like the scissor, the few of people that did, and you get stuck. Or maybe you want a second scissor or a second something. So there's some solutions to that as well. The Black Widow is now tier 3 because secondary magic or secondary cleric class requirements have been removed and enhanced, so it is now a tier 3 weapon instead of a tier 2. However, tiers also are easier to climb through as well in the pattern of 1, 1, 2, 2, 3 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you'll get to it pretty similarly in time as you previously got to tier 2, but you won't need magic user 2. You will need magic to deal more damage. Great Axes. Great Axes similarly nerfed by 15%. Again, primarily late game nerfs. They will still have higher starting damage than most weapons. They will probably have something more of like a 8% nerf in the early game and a 15% nerf in the late game. They will still one-shot things pretty regularly like Great Hammers. The Great Adze now has Extra Salt Flag. This is a new flag or new special. It grants 25% multiplier of salt. So huge. It stacks with the ring. So if you want to farm a lot of salt, especially in like New Game Plus, this is a way to do it. I don't know how useful it is, but this is a way to do it. Iron Butterfly has extra reach. The Head Taker, which is the Cyclops' axe. So it has no longer slow hit or extra poise. But I just want to make the comment, there are 6 great axes and 3 of them were slow hitter. And while I've buffed slow hitter, I've also tried to remove it where I can. Players generally have disliked slow hitter. So the head taker no longer is slow hitter or extra poise, but the Cyclops wields this pretty quickly anyway. He's not the slowest boss in the world, and he's swinging that thing around pretty quick. So it just kind of made sense to be that one instead of the really heavy stone looking ones. So there's still 2 out of 6 great axes or slow hitter, just not this one. Because it lost extra poise, it did gain a damage ratio here as well. Axes. Overall, Axe of Splendor now has the extra gold flag for a 25% multiplier. Again, stacks with other things. The Batsuichi Tsuka. From class 2 to class 4, it is no longer slow hitter. This is the sword that acts like an axe. It is Ronin Cran's weapon. There were some comments about this at one point, about this being just too early of a weapon for class and just so low damage. So I moved it to a later class. I didn't make it class 5, I made it class 4. So it's not the end all be all of regular axes, but it's pretty close. It's pretty good. And removing slow hitter yet again makes it, I think, more fun. The Venom Arbalos is no longer slow hitter either. Having a slow hitter on a poison weapon sucks. Just hands down, it held back the weapon probably on a regular basis. There are alternate ways I could have handled that, but the easiest way was to remove the slow hitter. I could have just increased its poison proc rate, but I didn't get to that. So it's not where I was going with that. It is just a poison axe, so it already has the axe movement set as it is. The Kraken axe has been moved to class 5. And then buffed accordingly, transmutation cost, etc. The poise damage of all axes was abnormally low. Axes sit in this weird situation between swords and hammers, maces, where swords are meant to be kind of medium or average poise. Axes are supposed to be kind of more medium poise, and hammers are supposed to be high poise and damage. And then axes and hammers are paired. Axes are meant to be the extra blades weapons of hammers, more or less. You have the hammers, which are full blunt, and you have the axes, which are half blunt. They, again, sit right in between swords and hammers. But then their poise didn't. So this has been adjusted and enhanced to 22. The great axe is 32, but the regular axe was only 14. So note the one-hand strong attack deals 100% strike damage. This was a hidden modifier similar to the kick flip on the dagger. So you can use the axe as a 50-50 weapon or a 100% strike weapon when you use the strong or heavy attack. There is an attack in there. It has a combo that's like a 4-hit combo, and the final attack in there had a slash value in it that was 100%. So I tried to amplify the likelihood of that hitting so that it was always hitting. Because it's a 4-hit combo, you're not going to hit it, but it's there if you want to try to hit it. If you really want that slash damage, it exists. So you have a 100% strike damage and a 100% slash damage attack within the axe, which is kind of cool, but it may not be as useful as it is just thematically interesting. But it already was there. I just tried to make it more functional. Surprisingly, it was there, though. Basically, what happens is, because motion values are actually not weapon-based, they're actually just a value base. Different weapons actually share some of those values. So the axes share a motion value with the mace on the strong attack, which just happens to be, of course, still a mace. So it's 100% strike damage and converts the damage over. And same thing, axes shared an attack combo with swords, and the final hit in that happened to be a sword slash, but there was the axe slash still in there, which was 50-50. So I just removed the axe slash and made the sword slash more prominent. It's just kind of the hitbox of the motion value. Reapers. The Salt Reaver is no longer extra poise or slow hitter. Again, a removal of slow hitter. I tried to remove slow hitter in rank 5s and 4s as much as possible because you had situations where all the Reapers are normal speed, and then you get to the rank 5 and you have a slow hitter, and this is probably the most disappointing thing that you can upgrade a weapon into because you're so used to the moveset at this point in the game, and then you get a slow hitter weapon and the moveset has changed by being slow. The removable of extra poise has been offset with the extra salt bonus, which means that the damage is kind of average for the removal plus the addition. And the extra salt, again, is 25%. So the Salt Reaver as a design, the idea behind some of this was that you use the Salt Reaver to get extra salt, and then you can equip the Silver Salt Charm to use that salt as extra damage. So the Silver Salt Charm does 25% multiplier of damage and costs salt. Having both of those paired together, this could be a very powerful combo. Swords. The Virulent Scimitar no longer has extra blunt. The Branding Iron no longer has extra blunt. The Leviathan is no longer slow hitter or extra blunt. You're probably seeing a pattern here. I'm not a huge fan of the extra blunt on elemental weapons. Lowlander's Great Knife now has extra reach. Kraken Longsword is now tier 5, and the crafting has been adjusted. And the damage, of course, has been adjusted. And the poise on all swords has been adjusted down by 2 points from 20 to 18 to create the ratios I've talked about previously with daggers and greatswords. The Branding Iron is something to talk about a little further. If you read the lore of the Branding Iron, it talks about being crafted from the ashes of Ember Skulls. It wasn't. And then it talks about not needing magic to use it. And it was one of the highest valued magic weapons in the game. So I flipped the dex magic relationship, so it is now more dexterity than magic, but it still needs magic to reach its potential. So it's not just a pure dexterity weapon. The ratio has been adjusted, not just flipped. It's done both. So you will get something like 60 to 70% of your stat damage from dexterity, but to get your full potential of the damage, you'll still need to reach into magic. As well, the crafting requirements on the Branding Iron now match the lore of the weapon. Crafting and lore were not put together intentionally in the original game in any way. The lore was written separately from just building the game. So I was just trying to tie some things into the lore there, but it also makes sense since it literally describes it that way. So Branding Iron is still a very powerful weapon. It is just the dex version instead of the magic version that the classic mode had. Halberd. The War Scythe has extra reach, and the Rusted Great Ladle has match all buffs. The Naginata no longer has extra blades because it's redundant because halberds already do full blade damage. There were a few of these. If there's still any remaining, please let me know. If I missed something with extra blades or extra blunt, that's already like 100% strike or 100% blades. Wands. Adjusted significantly upwards to be closer to 90% of a staff, similar to how a crossbow is now 90% or 85% of a bow. So you were taking a pretty big hit to damage with the wands, and you then have to upgrade the wand separately from upgrading your sword, which is a lot of salt. It's a lot of crafting materials. Offhand weapons are expensive. So while they are expensive and while they are weaker than the primary version of their same weapon, bows versus crossbows and wands versus staves, I wanted them to still have a similar ratio, such as this 85 to 90% value. So wands are stronger, but they were already really strong, so I don't know how much you'll notice it. Antler Baton and the Cocoon Battledore. New flags. The Fast Hitter Magic version. This works with everything you'd expect it to work with, but it does not work with incantations if you're expecting that. They are not used through the wand. They do not get Fast Hitter Magic. So incantations are not benefited by this. But anything that you shoot out of the wand will be benefited by this, including all the barrage spells. So if you want to do more of a barrage build, these are it. This is one of the ways to do it. Now, their damage is reduced because they are fast hitter, just as all fast hitters have reduced damage. Staves. Cyrus Staff now has HP Leech Magic. It only leeches damage when you deal damage with magic or spell damage. This is a buff and a nerf. This makes the staff extremely crazy strong, but it also nerfs the max damage because staves were also really strong. So in a way, it was a way for me to nerf the damage and give utility instead of just nerfing the damage. Purgatory Scepter, which is the class 4 staff, now has increased base damage or total damage over the course of the game. However, it has what I'm calling Mana Eater as a flag. This has been added in patch 12. Spells cost a significant more amount of focus. It eats your focus, but its damage is higher. So this only affects spells, and it affects everything that gets the damage, gets the extra cost. So I believe it's something like Slow Hitter, where it's closer to like 18% bonus damage at the tier that the scepter is at. So something like 18% bonus damage, but something like 25 or 50, I don't remember, extra cost. So it's a lot more extra cost for a mild gain in damage, but there are ways to offset that cost with such things like the rings. Shield Slam and Tower Shields. The Shield Slam has been extended into the Shockwave, but mostly at the ground. So if something is aerial, you will not be able to hit it with that extra extension. The base speed has been increased by a multiplier of 50%. So it is significantly faster. The base damage is now 25, and the max damage is now 116. I believe that this is more. It now scales at 20% per upgrade rank, plus it has a mild strength scaling. So you'll need both strength and upgrading your shield to get the damage off of the Shield Slam. Previously, it was just strength. The stagger damage has been increased from 20 to 80. If you hit something with the Shield Slam, it will be staggered. If you hit the Shield Slam on a boss twice, it will be staggered, because most bosses have around 160, 120, something like that. A bunch of them have 200. But the Shield Slam will absolutely eat into their poise very quickly. The following things will now work with Shield Slam attacks: Stone Charm and Golden Wine. Golden Wine grants poise damage now. 25% bonus poise damage. So those both grant extra poise damage to the stagger of the Shield Slam. So Stone Charm would grant 10, and the Golden Wine poise would grant 25% before the 10. So that would bring you to 100. Pretty strong. If you want to do a full Shield Slam run, you could potentially do that very functionally. Maybe not easily, but functionally. HP and MP Leech Charms now count the shield as a melee weapon, so they work with it. The Pale Charm counts for the range of the Shield Slam, so that you can get a little extended range. The Mossy Charm for speed, the Bloodflower Ring and Charm for damage, and the Golden Wine damage also affect the shield. Notice that this is only the physical values, only the physical stuff that affects it here. Physical and utility. Shields in general have been simplified in a weird way that makes sense to my mind. I can't fully explain this, but it just makes sense to me. There were redundant shield types where you had the kite shield and the regular shield, and then you had the tower shield, and then you had the bucklers, but there was only like 3 bucklers or 2 bucklers in the entire game. So I have changed this with permission. And so anything that is circular is now a round shield. And round shields are meant to be lightweight and pretty powerful in a specific way. So round shields are well-rounded. On average, they are more well-rounded and have more average values than other shields. Normal shields are whatever they want to be. They can be well-rounded or they can be not well-rounded. They are more medium weight and they are slightly higher stagger or stamina reduction. The poise value on shields is a balance value for your stamina when you get hit. So the tower shields stay as tower shields as well. So they're the same thing. So basically, kite shields and bucklers have been kind of moved around a little bit based on their shape and thus their effective weight and defensive values. So light, medium, heavy is kind of the idea behind this. Shields no longer gain extra poise on level up. The poise has been adjusted on all shields. The shields now have an extra flag. This has been added to the 2 lower tier bucklers. This is for extra parry or faster parry time or extended parry time. So those shields aren't changed. It just checks to see if that flag is there or if they're a buckler type. So you can use this flag in Classic if you were modding, if you wanted to. And same thing, round shields are a new type. So you could actually implement round shields into the base game if you wished to do so with a mod. Armor poise is now additive instead of multiplicative to shield poise when blocking. This is a massive nerf. This is a weird situation where I wasn't sure if I agreed with it or not, and then it didn't exist for regular armor, it only existed for poise. So in the base game, when you use a shield and you block with it, and you actually tank a hit, you lose stamina, and that stamina is based on the poise damage times 2 with some modifiers and like New Game Plus modifiers and stuff like that. And then it would deplete your stamina based on that value. But that stamina cost was then reduced by your poise. So if you have, the default is 50 balance or poise on a shield. This includes blocking with your fists, by the way. 50 damage reduction, so to say, of the poise damage. Now, some shields had different values, such as 55 or 60 or 93. So 93, you can imagine, is a bit excessive maybe in certain points in the game, where your stamina basically doesn't even budge when blocking most hits. So that is why I removed this aspect, and they were buffed, by the way. Most things were buffed on the base level, so it's just kind of how it is. So upping your shield is still going to give you the defense, it's just not going to give you the poise bonus. Where both defense and poise kind of grow by a linear fashion, it creates kind of this weird exponential value near the high values. So I didn't want to create this 97% poise shield. But I wanted to help shields make sense even at low levels as well as high levels for stamina management. There should be a cost to every solution. So by making this additive, what I mean by this is in the original system, if you have 40 poise, this creates a 50% reduction. So 40 points gives a 50% reduction, which is multiplied by the original reduction, which might be anything from 75% to 50% to 90%. So if you have a shield with 50% reduction plus this 50% reduction, 40 poise creates a 75% reduction to the stamina lost from the hit. If you have a shield with 95% poise reduction, stamina cost reduction, then that 50% reduction takes it to 97.5, almost entirely removing any cost whatsoever. So the new calculation here is that instead of taking it from 50% reduction to 75% reduction, it will take it from something like 50% reduction to 66.6% reduction, a linear diminishing return instead of a multiplier effect. Similarly, and this is a personal preference, armor defense is now used when blocking, just like poise always has been. It is now also additive at a different ratio that is 200. It's the armor formula, basically. So if you have a shield with low values, such as your fists, which are just defaulted to 50% across the board, and you have 200 armor, you get the 200 armor added to the defense. So again, you'll go from 50% damage reduction from the shield, and then plus 200 would be a 50% damage diminishing additive reduction to 66.6% reduction. So having mid-tier armor, having medium or light armor, and then blocking with a relatively crappy shield is actually a strategy. But the good shields, the late game shields that hit 100% or 95% defense, those aren't going to benefit from this as much. So those are shields that you can wear basically naked with a great weapon on swap. So not much has changed there. And then overall, shields have had their weight reduced as well. Shields have had movements. I wanted to balance out where shields were found in the tree. There are a lot of shields that were really, really good, but they were either just too low or they were the wrong type. So you didn't have access to the right shield type at the right moment. So I just wanted to adjust this. So we had situations where there might be like 30 shields, but 10 of the 30 are tier 1, or 10 of the 30 were tier 2, or something like that. So Sunset Kite Shield has been moved from tier 1 to tier 2. This makes it stronger, just requires a higher tier. But higher tiers are easier to get to as well. Phoenix Shield has gone from tier 2 to tier 3. I want to make a comment on this. In the original enhanced mode, I did reduce its fire resistance from 100% to something like 95%, or 96% or something like that, where you needed to upgrade it 3 or 4 times to get the 100% back. I have in patch 12 removed this and reverted it. So the Phoenix Shield, if you have tier 3 shields and you pick up the Phoenix Shield and you equip it, it's found in the castle. You're supposed to use it against the worm, and it still works as it was originally intended now. You do have extra pickups to upgrade it or other weapons and such in the Castle of Storms, though, and in the Sunken Keep as well. So there are extra upgrades that would help this normally, but I have removed the requirement to upgrade it entirely. The Kraken Great Shield has moved to tier 3. Ocean Great Shield has been moved from tier 2 to tier 3. The Carapace Pavis has moved from tier 3 to tier 4, and the Iron Rampart, a very strong shield, has been moved to tier 5. It just makes sense. It was one of the strongest shields in the game and needed to be tier 5. The Boshin Great Shield now grants the Bloodflower Ring effect. It looks like a spear shield. It's what it is, where you could have a notch for your spear to kind of fit into. The Pendragon Targe now has the easy parry effect. Carapace Pavis now has the HP Leech Flag. It grants it to your melee weapons, melee attacks. The Flare's Rack now has the bloody effect, the bloody ring. This is purely a combat aesthetic. It just makes the game really, really bloody. Naturally, this is completely overridden if you have violence turned low. But if you want to use the Flare's Rack, you can just have some extra blood there. The Umbral Aegis now grants permanent undersight. So if you can get the Aegis, and you can, by the Dome of the Forgotten, then you will have permanent undersight while wearing it. I think this is pretty cool, and I hope you do too. The shields that have been changed around: the Pendragon Targe, the Mirror Shield, the Rundach, the Carapace Pavis are all now considered round shields, and as such have had some of their stats mildly changed.